a gentleman was explaining to me on Friday in Washington. So I'm very optimistic that there has been a major sea change within a number of sectors where people are waking up to the fact that we really do need to get off of the early industrial revolution's engine, and that is fossil fuel and coal and oil, and come into a true high-tech new civilization, and that the time to do that is absolutely right now. And there are people ready to support this, not just financially, which is important. I mean, it's not inconsequential that you know, obviously people need funding, but I think strategically and network support and institutional support, and that's what we have identified over the last 15 years. Our group has developed excellent ties into those sorts of groups and have been educating them quietly behind the scenes, as it were. And I think right now we have probably the best potential for bringing a new system out that there has existed in the last 100 years. In fact, I'm certain of that, and that's why we formed Arrow. I think things have changed and evolved enough that we can make a serious run at this and succeed. And I'm not going to say it's going to be easy. I'm not going to say there aren't going to be a lot of challenges. It's not going to be universal support, but there's going to be widespread support, even within these elite circles.
A couple of news stories I wanted to bring up along these lines, and also just a mention of a question I want to ask after we address these two news stories. And the question is, what's the difference between Arrow and Seize Power, which predated it? But first, the two news stories. A week and a half ago, we ran a story saying that the Club of Rome, which is notorious for being behind such things as the September 11th event and other atrocities in the history of this planet, the masterminding of the conspiracy, if you want to use that word, which is what it amounts to, of these power elite, these black ops who are running the show and want to stay in power. The Club of Rome is taking leadership now in aggregating all of the European clean energy technologies into a clean energy grid, so that you have wind and solar and geothermal tied together for a 24/7 sustainable or always on, always dependable backup system type of thing. And they're spearheading this thing.
Right.
So, they're jumping in, and they're now saying, we're the leaders in this. And you see Exxon and you see Shell, trying to say, hey, we're clean. You see Chevrolet and these different big companies who have been the bullies in the past, now stepping up to the plate saying, we're the leaders. We're the ones who are stepping out on this issue. Last Friday, there was an event in London in which, this is the second news story I was mentioning, in which the rich and famous got together. Together there was about $100 billion in net worth represented in this gathering of people. Al Gore was there, and among the things was supposed to be announced some new clean energy technology that would resolve our energy need and provide us with clean power. And I've been scoping the news to find a report of what was disclosed, and there's nothing.
Well, you have to understand that this is a process, and what you're seeing with some of these announcements is exactly what I was just describing, is that there are a lot of people who now are on board doing this. Now, the first level of this is to say, yes, we'll do stuff with the biomass and different types of fuels and wind and solar and what have you. Now, these same entities certainly know that there are these more advanced systems, but they're laying the groundwork for the idea that we can phase out of fossil fuels. Now, in fact, this is exactly some of what I was talking about with this gentleman, this elite leader in Washington on Friday, and that is the time for incrementalism is over. That what you're going to see is we're either going to have our civilization brought to its knees, or we're going to transition quickly into serious replacements for oil and gas and coal and nuclear power and centralized utility grids, which are all creaky and falling apart all over the world. And that isn't going to happen through just solar and wind alone or biomass or what have you, because it's inadequate for the needs. You know, we have a 650 coal-fired power plants going online in the next decade in China and India alone, which will by themselves double global greenhouse gases, and that's if everyone else stopped using everything, which isn't going to happen. So they're realizing that we have an enormous need for much bolder steps, and in fact, that's what the crux of the conversation with this gentleman was about. And I have seen this in other circles as well. So what I think, however, we have to do is not sit back and think that these elements are going to do it, that we're going to have to continue to provide the leadership, because if the people lead and we continue to do the education, then these other groups are going to come along, and not all of them, and some of them may be Trojan horses that are pretending to cooperate when in reality they want to stay in a sort of metered society. You know, J.P. Morgan famously had told Tesla, paraphrasing, that basically it said, "This is great, this sort of technology, but I can't put a meter on it." And so, how am I going to make the money? So I think that we have to continue to, while being encouraged by these sorts of things, be also a little skeptical and say that, look, we need to be sure that the new energy efforts that are the real breakthroughs, what I think will be the true solution to the energy and sustainability and environmental issues, which are these sorts of technologies, advanced physics, dealing with the so-called zero point or quantum vacuum field, electrogravitic systems, other closed energy systems that are not dependent on wind and solar, that could generate a lot of power. We're working right now. We have just issued a $100,000 contract for an engineering firm to build us a 10-kilowatt closed system that we hope will be done in the next couple of months to 3 months. We'll see how successful they are. So what we're going to do is continue to move forward while being hopeful that these sort of large and powerful entities continue to move in this direction, but not sit back on our laurels and thinking that Big Brother's going to actually take care of it, because I think that there's a saying. When I lived in Israel for 3 years, I got to know a lot of the Bedouin, and they had a great expression, trust in God, but tie your camel. And, you need to do that.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that comes to mind as we're having this conversation is this whole question of the prophetic scenario, for lack of better terminology, that I've had in my mind for many years, is that you have this control paradigm, the conspiracy that is controlling things, that's running the show, and they have their heyday, and then their time comes to an end. They are appended, and a new remnant comes forward who are more enlightened, who are more loving, who are more personal responsibility-based, and a new society emerges that is much more enlightened than what has been there before. And there's kind of a meltdown in the middle of the collapse of the status quo as this new thing comes forward. It seems to me that there's a possibility emerging in which there could be more of a transition rather than a collapse and a phoenix rising out of the ashes scenario. And the phoenix rising out of the ashes would be the new society that's more enlightened, while the ashes would be the status quo. What is your take at this time on the transition that we're looking at? Are we going to transition without a huge meltdown, or is a meltdown somewhat necessary to undo the old guys and bring in the new?
Well, I think you have both twin processes going on contemporaneously, and I think that this is how things have always gone forward. And whether it's a meltdown for the, if you will, the old order of things, or a transformation, is really a matter of free will and choice. For example, Olivetti's typewriters could have chosen to go digital, but they didn't, so they went bankrupt. The carriage makers, that made horse-drawn buggies back in the 1800s could have chosen to go with automotive, but they were skeptical and they didn't. And most of them went. Most of those coach works, not all of them, went bankrupt. I think what you have to see is that this is something